Morning. Welcome to another episode of Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. One of my favorite. The one book that got me interested in reading vampire books. Prior to this, I had only watched movies, so here we go. You're talking madness. The fact is, I want you gone from here. You want me gone? You, he sneered. He was building a card palace on the dining room table with a pack of very fine French cards. You whining coward of a vampire who prowls the night killing alley cats and rats and staring for hours at candles as if they were people, and standing in the rain like a zombie until your clothes are drenched and you smell like old wardrobe trunks in attics and have the look of a baffled idiot at the zoo. You've nothing more to tell me, and your insistence on recklessness has endangered us both. I might live in that oratory alone while this house fell to ruin. I don't care about it, I told him, because this is quite true. But you must have all the things you never had of life, and make of immortality a junk shop in which both of us become grotesque. Now, go look at your father and tell me how long he has to live, for that's how long you stay, and only if the slaves don't rise up against us. He told me then to go look at his father myself, since I was the one who was always looking, and I did. The old man was truly dying. I had been spared my mother's death, more or less, because she had died very suddenly on an afternoon. She had been found with her sewing basket seated quietly in the courtyard. She had died as one goes to sleep, but now I seeing a natural death that was too slow with agony and with consciousness. And I'd always liked the old man. He was kindly and simply made few demands. By day he sat in the sun of the gallery, dozing and listening to the birds. By night, another chatter on our part kept him company. He could play chess, carefully feeling each piece and remembering the entire state of the board with remarkable accuracy. And though Lestat would never state of the board with remarkable accuracy, and though Lestat would never play with him, I did often. Now he lay gasping for breath, his forehead hot and wet, the pillow around him stained with sweat. And as he moaned and prayed for death, Lestat in the other room began to play the spinet. I slammed it shut. I barely missed his fingers. You won't play while he dies, I said. The hell I won't, he answered to me. I'll play the drum if I like. And taking a great sterling silver platter from a sideboard, he slipped a finger through one of the candles and beat it with a spoon. I told him to stop it, or I would make him stop it, and then we both ceased. Our noise became because the old man was calling his name. He was saying that he must talk to Lestat now before he died. I told Lestat to go to him. The sound of his crying was terrible. Why should I? I've cared for him all these years. Isn't that enough? He drew from his pocket a nail file, and seating himself on the foot of the old man's bed, he began to file his long nails. Meantime, I should tell you that I was aware of slaves about the house. They were watching and listening. I was truly hoping the old man would die within minutes. Once or twice before I dealt with suspicion or doubt on the part of the several slaves, but never such a number. I immediately rang for Daniel, the slave to whom I'd given the overseer's house and position. But while I waited for him, I could hear the old man talking to Lestat, who sat with his legs crossed, filing and filing, one arrow eyebrow arched, his attention on his perfect nails. It was the school, the old man was saying. Oh, I know you remember. What can I say to you? He moaned. You'd better say it, Lestat said, because you're about to die. The old man let out a terrible noise, and I suspect I made some sound of my own. I positively loathed Lestat. I had a mind now to get him out of the room. Well, you know that, don't you? Even a fool like you knows that, said Lestat. You'll never forgive me, will you? Not now, not even after I'm dead, said the old man. I don't know what you're talking about, said Lestat. My patience was becoming exhausted with him, and the old man. Much his appearance had shaken me. For when I breathe death, it is swift and conscienceless, leaving the victim as if in an enchanted sleep. But this was the slow decay, the body refusing to surrender to the vampire of time, which had sucked upon it for years and on end. Lestat, he said, just once. Don't be hard with me. Just for once. Be for me the boy you were, my son. He said this over and over, the words, my son, and then he said something I could not hear about innocence and innocence destroyed. But I could see that he was not out of his mind, as Lestat thought, but in some terrible state of lucidity. The burden of the past was on him with full force, and the present, which was only death, which he fought with all his will, could do nothing to soften that burden. But I knew I might deceive him if I used all my skill, and bending close to him now, I whispered the word Father. It was not Lestat's voice, it was mine, a soft whisper. Be calmed at once, and thought that he might die. But he held my hand as if he were being pulled under by dark ocean waves, and I alone could save him. He talked now of some country teacher, a name garbled, who found in Lestat a brilliant pupil, and begged to take him to a monastery for an education. He cursed himself for bringing Lestat home, for burning his books. You must forgive me, Lestat, he cried. I pressed his hand tightly, hoping this might do for some answer, but he repeated this again. You have it all to live for, but you are as cold and brutal as I was then. With the work all was there, and the cold and the hunger. Lestat, you must remember, you were the gentlest of them all. God will forgive me, if you forgive me. Well, at that moment, the real SO came through the door. I gestured for quiet, but he wouldn't see that, so I had to get up quickly, so the father wouldn't hear his voice from a distance. The slaves had run from him, but they're out there. They're gathered in the dark. I hear them, said Lestat, And then he glared at the old man. "Kill him, Louis," he said to me, his voice touched with the first pleading I'd ever heard in it. Then he bit down in rage. "Do it! Lean over that pillow. Tell him you forgive him all. Forgive him for taking you out of school when you were a boy. Tell him that now." "For what?" Lestat grimaced, so that the face looked like a skull. "Take me out of school." He threw up his hands and let out a terrible roar of desperation. "Damn him." "Kill him," he said. "Nor I," I said. "You forgive him, or you kill him yourself. Go on. Kill your own father." The old man begged to be told what we were saying. He called out, "Son, son," and Lestat danced like a bad Rumpelstiltskin about to put his foot through the moor. I went to the lace curtains. I could see and hear the slaves surrounding the house of Point du Leo. Forms woven in the window, shadows near. "You were Joseph among your brothers," the old man said, "the best of them. But how was I to know? It was when you were gone I knew, when all those years passed, and they could offer me no comfort, no solace. And then you came back to me and took me from the farm. But it wasn't you. It wasn't the same boy." I turned on Lestat now, vertibly dragged him towards the bed. Never had I seen him so weak, and at the same time enraged. He shook me off, and then knelt down near the pillow, glowering at me. I stood resolute and whispered, "Forgive." "It's all right, Father. You must rest easy. I hold nothing against you," he said, his voice thin and strained over his anger. The old man turned on the pillow, murmuring something soft with relief, but Lestat was already gone. He stopped short in the doorway, his hands over his ears. "They're coming," he whispered, and then turned just so he could see me. He said, "Take him, for God's sake." The old man never even knew what happened. He never awoke from his stupor. I bled him just enough, opening the gash so he would then die without feeding my dark passion. Look at that. Good morning. Thought I couldn't bear. I knew now it wouldn't matter if the body was found in this manner, because I had had enough of Point du Lac and Lestat and all this identity of Point du Lac's prosperous master. I would torch the house and turn to the wealth I had held under many names, safe for such a moment. Meantime, Lestat was after the slaves. He would leave such a ruin and death behind him no one could make a story of that night at Point du Lac. And I went with him. As before, his ferocity was mysterious. But now I bared my fangs on the humans who fled from me. My steady advance overcoming their clumsy, pathetic speed, as the veil of death descended, or the veil of madness. The power and proof of the vampire was incontestable, so that slaves scattered in all directions, and it was I who ran back up the steps to put the torch to Point du Lac. Lestat came bounding after me. "What are you doing?" he shouted. "Are you mad?" But there was no way to put out the flames. They're gone, and you're destroying it, all of it. He turned round and round in the magnificent parlor, amidst in the fragile splendor. "Get your coffin out." "You have 3 hours till dawn," I said. The house was a funeral pyre. "Could the fire have hurt you?" asked the boy. Most definitely, said the vampire. Did you go back to the oratory? Was it safe? No, not at all. Some 50 slaves were scattered around the grounds. Many of them would not have desired the life of a runaway, and would most certainly go right to Fernier or south to Beljardin plantation downriver. I had no intention of staying there that night, but there was little time to go anywhere else. The woman, Babette, said the boy. Oh, the vampire smiled. Yes, I went to Babette. She lived now at Fernier with her young husband. I had enough time to load my coffin into the carriage and go to her. But what about Lestat? The vampire sighed. Well, I'm reading Interview with a Vampire. The vampire sighed. Lestat went with me. It was his intention to go on to New Orleans, and he was trying to persuade me to do just that. But when I saw I meant to hide Fernier, he opted for that also. We may not have ever made it to New Orleans. It was growing light. Not so the mortal eyes would have seen it, but Lestat and I could see it. All right. Okay. For those of you who are asking, I am reading Anne Rice's Interview with a Vampire. This is Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. All right. Now we are on. So that, and, oh, the topic? Oh. All right. Interview for Vampires for Children? You may think so, but I love it. All right. Chapter 6. Now, as for Babette. I had visited her once, as I told you. She had scandalized the coast by remaining alone on the plantation without a man in the house, without even an older woman. Babette's greatest problem was that she might succeed financially only to suffer the isolation of social ostracism. She has such a sensibility that wealth itself means nothing to her. Family, a line. This meant something to Babette, though she was able to hold the plantation together. The scandal was wearing on her. She was giving up inside. I came to her one night in the garden, not permitting her to look on me. I told her in a most gentle voice that I was the same person she'd seen before, that I knew of her life and her suffering. Don't expect people to understand it, I told her. They are fools. They want you to retire because of your brother's death. They would use your life as if it were merely oil for a proper lamp. You must defy them, but you must defy them with purity and confidence. She was listening, all the while in silence. I told her she was to give a ball for a cause, and the cause to be religious. She might pick a convent in New Orleans, anyone, a plan for a philanthropic ball. She would invite her deceased mother's dearest friends to be chaperones, and she would do all of this with perfect confidence. Above all, perfect confidence. It was confidence and purity which were all important. Well, Babette thought this to be a stroke of genius. I don't know what you are, and you will not tell me, she said. This was true. I would not. But I can only think that you are an angel. And she begged to see my face. That is, she begged in the manner of such people as Babette, who are not given a truly begging anyone for anything. Not that Babette was proud. She was simply strong and honest, which in most cases makes begging. I see you want to ask me a question. The vampire stopped. Oh no, said the boy, who had meant to hide it. But you mustn't be afraid to ask me anything. If I held something too close, and when the vampire said that his face darkened for an instant, he frowned, and his brows drew together. A small well appeared in the flesh of his forehead over his left brow, as though someone had pressed it with a finger. It gave him a peculiar look of deep distress. If I held something too close for you to ask about it, I would not bring it up in the first place, he said. The boy found himself staring at the vampire's eyes, at the eyelashes which were fine black wires in the tender flesh of the lids. Ask me, he said to the boy. Babette, the way you speak of her, said the boy, as if your feeling was special. Did I give you the impression I could not feel? Asked the vampire. No, not at all. Obviously, you felt for the old man. You stayed to comfort him when you were in danger, and what you felt for young Fournier when Lestat wanted to kill him. All this you explained, but I was wondering, did you have a special feeling for Babette? Was that feeling for Babette all along that caused you to protect Fournier? You mean love, said the vampire. Why do you hesitate to say it? Because you spoke of detachment, said the boy. Do you think that angels are detached? Asked the vampire. The boy thought for a moment. Yes, he said. But aren't angels capable of love? Asked the vampire. Do angels gaze upon the face of God with complete love? The boy thought for a moment. Love or adoration, he said. What is the difference? Asked the vampire thoughtfully. What is the difference? It was clearly not a riddle for the boy. He was asking himself. Angels feel love and pride, the pride of the fall, and hatred, the strong overpowering emotions of detached persons in whom emotion and will are one, he said finally. He stared at the table now, as though he were thinking this over, was not entirely satisfied with it. I had for Bet a strong feeling. It is not the strongest I've known for a human being. He looked up at the boy, but it was very strong. Babette was to me, in her own way, an ideal human being. He shifted in his chair, the cape moving softly about him, and turned his face to the windows. The boy bent forward and checked the tape. Then he took another cassette from his briefcase, and begging the vampire's pardon, fitted it into place. I'm afraid I did ask something too personal. I didn't mean, he said anxiously to the vampire. You asked nothing of the sort, said the vampire, looking at him suddenly. It is a question right to the point. I feel love, and I felt some measure of love for Babette, though not the greatest love I have ever felt. It was a foreshadowed in Babette. To return to my story, Babette's charity ball was the success and re-entry in social life, assured by it. Her money generously underwrote any doubts in the minds of her suitors and families, and she married. On summer nights I used to visit her, never letting her see me or know that I was there. I came to see that she was happy, and seeing her happy, I felt happiness as the result. And to Babette I came now with Lestat. He would have killed the Ferniers long ago if I hadn't stopped him, and he thought now that was what I meant to do. And what place would that bring? I asked. You call me the idiot. You have been the idiot all along. Do you think I don't know why you made me a vampire? You couldn't live by yourself. You couldn't manage even the simplest things. For years now, I've managed everything while you sat about making a pretense of superiority. There's nothing left for you to tell me about life. I have no need for you, no use for you. It's you who need me. And if you touch but one of the Fernier slaves, I'll get rid of you. It will be a battle between us, and I needn't point out to you. I have more wit to fare better in my little finger. Oh my God, why does it keep doing this? Oh my God. Oh. Was thinking at that moment, wordlessly and rather deeply, how sublime friendship between Lestat and me might have been, how few impediments to it there would have been, and how much to be shared. Perhaps it was the closeness of Babette which caused me to feel it, for how could I truly ever come to know Babette, except, of course, through my one final way, to take her life, to become one with her in an embrace of death, when my soul would become one with my heart and nourished with it. But my soul wanted to know Babette without my need to kill, without robbing her of her every breath of life, every drop of blood. But Lestat, how we might have known each other, had he been a man of character, a man of even a little thought. The old man's words came back to me. Lestat, a brilliant pupil, a lover of books that had been burned. I knew only the Lestat who sneered at my library, called it a pile of dust, ridiculed relentlessly my reading, my meditations. I became aware now that the house over our heads was quieting. Now and then feet moved, and the boards creaked, and the light in the cracks of the boards gave faint, uneven illumination. I could see Lestat feeling along the brick walls, his hard, enduring vampire face a twisted mask of human frustration. I was confident we must part ways at once, that I must, if necessary, put an ocean between us, and I realized that I had tolerated him this long because of self-doubt. I had fooled myself into believing I stayed for the old man, and for my sister and my husband and her husband. But I stayed with Lestat because I was afraid he did not know essential secrets as a vampire which I could not discover alone, and more important, because he was the only one of my kind whom I knew. He had never told me how he had become a vampire, or where I might find a single other member of our kind. This troubled me greatly then, as much as it had for 4 years. I hated and wanted to leave him, yet could I leave him? Meantime, as all this passed through my thoughts, Lestat continued to deprive. He didn't need me. He wasn't going to put up with anything, especially not any threat from the Fourniers. We had to be ready when the door opened. Remember, he said to the finally, speed and strength. They cannot match us in that. And fear. Remember always to strike fear. Don't be sentimental now. You'll cost us everything. You wish to be on your own after this? I asked him. I wanted him to say it. I did not have the courage, or rather, I did not know my own feelings. I want to get out of New Orleans, he said. I was simply warning you. I don't need you. But to get out of here, we need each other. You don't begin to know how to use your powers. You have no innate sense of what you are. Use your persuasive powers with this woman if she comes. But if she comes with others, then be prepared to act like what you are. Which is what? I asked him, because I had never seemed such a mystery to me as it did at that time. What am I? He was openly disgusted. He threw up his hands. Be prepared, he said, now baring his magnificent teeth to kill. He looked suddenly at the boards overhead. They're going to bed up there. Do you hear them? After a long silent time during which Lestat paced and sat there musing, plumbing my mind for what I might do or say to Babette, or deeper still for the answer to a harder question. What did I feel for Babette? After a long time, the light flared beneath the door. Lestat was poised to jump whoever should open it. It was Babette alone, and she entered with a lamp, not seeing Lestat, who stood behind her, but looking directly at me. I had never seen her as she looked then. Her hair was down for bed, a mass of dark waves behind her white dressing gown, and her face was tight with worry and fear. This gave it a feverish radiance and made her large brown eyes all more huge. As I have told you, I loved her strength and honesty, the greatness of her soul, and I did not feel passion for her as you would feel it. But I found her more alluring than any woman I had known in mortal life. Even in the severe dressing gown, her arms and breasts were round and soft. She seemed to be an intriguing soul clothed in rich, mysterious flesh. I, who am hard and spare and dedicated to a purpose, felt drawn to her irresistibly, and knowing it could only culminate in death, I turned away from her at once, wondering if when she gazed into my eyes she found them dead and soulless. You are the one who came to me before, she said now, as if she hadn't been sure, and you are the owner of Point du Lac. You, Argyle. I knew as she spoke that she must have heard the wildest stories of last night, and there would be no convincing her of any lie. I had used my unnatural appearance twice to reach her, to speak to her. I could not hide it or minimize it now. I mean you no harm, I said to her. I need only a carriage and horses. The horses I left last night in the pasture. She didn't seem to hear my words. She drew closer, determined to catch me in the circle of her light. And then I saw Lestat behind her, his shadow merging with her shadow on the brick wall. He was anxious and dangerous. You will give me the carriage, I insisted. She was looking at me now, the lamp raised. Just when I meant to look away, I saw her face change. It went still, blank, as if her soul were losing its consciousness. She closed her eyes and shook her head. It occurred to me that I had somehow caused her to go into a trance without any effort on my part. What are you? She whispered. You're from the devil. You were from the devil when you came to met. The devil, I answered her. This distressed me more than I thought I could be distressed. If she believed this, then she would think my counsel bad. She would question herself. Her life was rich and good, and I knew she mustn't do this. Like all strong people, she suffered always a measure of loneliness. She was a marginal outsider, a secret infidel of a certain sort, and the balance by which she lived might be upset if she were to question her own goodness. She stared at me with undisguised horror. It was as if in horror she forgot her own vulnerable position. And now Lestat, who was drawn to weakness like a parched man to water, grabbed her wrist, and she screamed and dropped the lamp. The flames leaped in the splattered oil, and Lestat pulled her backwards towards the open door. "You get the carriage," he said to her. "Get it now, and the horses. You are in mortal danger. Don't talk of devils." I stomped on the flames and went for Lestat, shouting at him to leave her. He had her by both wrists, and she was furious. "You'll rouse the house if you don't shut up," he said to me, "and I'll kill her. Get the carriage. Lead us." "Talk to the stable boy," he said to her, pushing her into the open air. We moved slowly across the dark court. My distress was almost unbearable. Lestat ahead of me, and before us both Babette, who moved backwards, her eyes peering in the dark. Suddenly she stopped. One dim light burned in the house above. "I'll get you nothing," she said. I reached for Lestat's arm and told him I must handle this. "She'll reveal us to everyone unless you let me talk to her," I whispered to him. "Then get yourself in check," he said disgustedly. "Be strong. Don't quibble with her. You go as I talked. Go to the stables and get the carriage and the horses. But don't kill." Whether he'd obeyed me or not, I didn't know. But he darted away just as I stepped up to Babette. Her face was a mixture of fury and resolution. She said, "Get thee behind me, Satan." And I stood there before her then, speechless, just holding her in my glance as surely as she held me. If she could hear Lestat in the night, she gave no indication. Her hatred for me burned me like fire. Why do you say this to me?" I asked. "Was the counsel I gave you bad? Did I do you harm? I came to help you, to give you strength. I thought only of you when I had no need to think of you at all." She shook her head. "But why? Why do you talk to me like this?" she asked. "I know what you've done to Point du Lac. You live there like a devil. The slaves are wild with stories. All day men have been on the river road, on the Point du Lac. My husband was there. He saw the house in ruins, the bodies of slaves throughout the orchards, the fields. Why do you speak to me gently? What do you want of me?" She clung now to the pillars of the porch and was backing slowly to the staircase. Something moved above in the lighted window. "I cannot give you such answers now," I said. I said to her, "Believe me when I tell you I came to you only to do you good, and would not have brought worry and care to your last night for anything. Had I the choice." The vampire stopped. The boy sat forward, his eyes wide. The vampire was frozen, staring off, lost in his thoughts, his memory, and the boy looked down suddenly, as if this were the respectful thing to do. He glanced again at the vampire and then away, his own face as distressed as the vampire's, and then he started to say something, but he stopped. All right, moving on. We are now in Chapter 7 of Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. I guess those joining are confused what we're reading. This is Chapter 7, Interview with the Vampire. The vampire turned towards him and studied him, so that the boy flushed and looked away again anxiously. But then he raised his eyes and looked into the vampire's eyes. He swallowed, but he held the vampire's gaze. In this, what you want? The vampire whispered. Is this what you wanted to hear? He moved the chair and back soundlessly walked to the window. The boy sat as if stunned, looking at his broad shoulders and the long mass of the cape. The vampire turned his head slightly. You don't answer me. I'm not giving you what you want, am I? You wanted an interview, something of a broadcast on the radio. That doesn't matter. I'll throw the tapes away if you want. The boy rose. I can't say I understand all you're telling me. You know I was lying if I said I did. So how can I ask to go on except to say what I do understand? What I do understand is like nothing I've ever understood before. He took a step towards the vampire. The vampire appeared to be looking down into Divisadero Street. Then he turned his head slowly and looked at the boy and smiled. His face was serene, almost affectionate, and the boy suddenly felt uncomfortable. He shoved his hands into his pockets and turned towards the table. Then he looked at the vampire attentively and said, Will you please go on? The vampire turned with folded arms and leaned against the window. Why? He asked. The boy was at a loss. Because I want to hear it. All right, said the vampire, with the same smile playing on his lips. And he went to the chair and sat opposite the boy and turned the recorder just a little and said, Marvelous contraption, really. So let me go on. You must understand that what I felt for Babette now was a desire for communication, stronger than any other desire I then felt, except for the physical desire for blood. It was so strong in me, this desire, that it made me feel the depth of my capacity for loneliness. When I'd spoken to her before, there had been a brief but direct communication which was as simple and as satisfying as taking a person's hand, clasping it, letting it go gently. All this in a moment of great need and distress. But now we are at odds. To Babette, I was a monster, and I found it horrible to myself, and would have done anything to overcome her feeling. I told her the counsel I had given her was right, that no instrument of the devil could do right even if he chose. I know, she answered me, but this she meant that she could no more trust me than the devil himself. I approached her and she moved back. I raised my hand and she shrank, clutching for the ring. All right then, I said, feeling a terrible exasperation. Why did you protect me last night? Why have you come to me alone? What I saw in her face was cunning. She had a reason, but she would by no means reveal it to me. It was impossible for her to speak to me freely, openly, to give me the communication I desired. I felt weary looking at her. The night was already late, and I could see and hear that Lestat had stolen into the wine cellar and taken our caskets, and I had a need to get away. and other needs besides, the need to kill and drink. But it wasn't that which made me weary. It was something else, something far worse. It was as if this night were only 1,000s of nights, a world without end, not curving into the night to make a great arcing line of which I couldn't see the end. A night in which I roamed alone under cold, mindless stars. I think I turned away from her and put my hand to my eyes. I felt oppressed and weak suddenly. I think I was making some sound without my will. And this, on this vast and desolate landscape of night, where I was standing alone, where Babette was only an illusion, I saw suddenly a possibility that I had never considered before. A possibility from which I had fled, wrapped as I was with the world, fallen into the senses of the vampire, in love with color and shape and sound and singing and softness and infinite variation. Babette was moving, but I took no note of it. She was taking something from her pocket. A great ring of household keys jingled there. She was moving up the steps. I let her go away. I was thinking, "Creature of the devil," I whispered. "Get thee behind me, Satan," I repeated. I turned to look at her now. She was frozen on the steps with wide, suspicious eyes. She reached the lantern which hung on the wall, and she held it in her hands, just staring at me, holding it tight, like a vulnerable purse. "You think I come from the devil?" I asked her. She quickly moved her fingers around the hook of the lantern, and with her right hand made the sign of the cross, the Latin words barely audible to me, and her face blanched, her eyebrows rose, when there was absolutely no change because of it. "Did you expect me to go up in a puff of smoke?" I asked her. I drew closer now, for I had gained detachment from her by virtue of my thoughts. "And where would I go?" I asked her. "Where would I go? To hell, from whence I came? To the devil, from whom I came?" And stood at the foot of the steps. "Suppose I told you I know nothing of the devil? Suppose I told you that I do not know if he exists?" It was the devil I had seen upon the landscape of my thoughts. It was the devil about whom I thought now. I turned away from her. She wasn't hearing me as you are now. She wasn't listening. I looked up at the stars. Lestat was ready. I knew it. It was as if he'd been ready there with the carriage for years, and she had stood upon the step for years. I had the sudden sensation my brother was there, and been there for ages also, and that he was talking to me now in an excited voice, and what he was saying was desperately important, but it was going away from me as fast as he said it, like the rustle of rats in the rafters of an immense house. There was scraping sound and burst of light. I don't know whether I come from the devil or not. I don't know what I am. I am. I shouted at Babette, my voice deafening in my own sensitive ears. I am to live to the end of the world, and I do not even know what I am. But the light flared before me. It was the lantern which she had lit with a match and held now, so I couldn't see her face. For a moment I could see nothing but the light, and then the great weight of the lantern struck me full force in the chest, and the glass shattered on the bricks. And the flames roared on my legs, in my face. Lestat was shouting from the darkness, "Put it out, idiot! It will consume you!" And I felt something thrashing me wildly in the blindness. It was Lestat's. Oh, Lestat's what? Why does this keep happening? higher good in the mind of the artist. Oh my. So Lestat's coming to the rescue. The conflict lies between the morals of the artist and the morals of society, not between aesthetics and morality. But often this isn't understood, and here comes the waste, the tragedy. An artist stealing paints from a store, for example, imagines himself to have made an inevitable but immoral decision. And then he sees as self as fallen from grace. What follows his despair and petty irresponsibility, as if morality were a great glass world which can be utterly shattered by one act. But this was not my great concern. Then, I did not know these things then. I believe I killed animals for aesthetic reasons only. I hedged against the great moral question of whether or not, by my very nature, I was damned. Because you see, though Lestat had never said anything about devils or hell to me, I believed I was damned when I went over to him, just as Judas must have believed it when he put the noose around his neck. You understand? The color burned for a moment in the blotches on his cheeks. Were you? He whispered. The vampire only sat there, smiling. A smile that played on his lips like the light. The boy was staring at him now as if he were just seeing him for the first time. Perhaps, said the vampire, drawing himself up, crossing his legs, we should take things one at a time. Perhaps I should go on with my story. Yes, please, said the boy. I was agitated that night, as I told you. I hedged against the question as a vampire. Now it completely overwhelmed me, and in that state I had no desire to live. Well, this produced in me, as it can in humans, a craving that which will satisfy at least a physical desire. I think I used it as an excuse. I have told you what the kill means to vampires. You can imagine what I have said the difference between rat and a man. I went down into the street after Lestat and walked for blocks. The streets were muddy then, the actual block islands above the gutters, and the entire city so dark compared to the cities of today. The lights were as beacons in a black sea, even with morning rising slowly. Only the dormers and high porches of the houses were emerging from the dark. And to a mortal man, the narrow streets I found were like pitch. Am I damned? Am I from the devil? Is my nature that of a devil? I was asking myself over and over. And if it is, why then do I revolt against it? Tremble when Babette hurls a flaming lantern at me. Turn away in disgust when Lestat kills. What have I become in becoming a vampire? Where am I to go? And all the while, as death wish caused me to neglect my thirst grew hotter. My veins were veritable threads of pain in my flesh. My temples throbbed, and I finally could stand it no longer. Torn apart by the wish to take no action, to starve, to wither in thought on the one hand, and driven to kill on the other, I stood in an empty, desolate street and heard the sound of a child crying. She was within. I drew close to the walls, trying in my habitual detachment only to understand the nature of her cry. She was weary, arching, and utterly alone. She had been crying for so long now, and that soon she would stop from sheer exhaustion. I slipped my hand up under the heavy wooden shutter and pulled it So the bolt slipped. There sat in the dark room beside a dead woman, a woman who'd been dead for some days. The room itself was cluttered with trunks and packages as though a number of people had been packing to leave. But the mother lay half-clothed, her body already in decay, and no one else was there but the child. It was moments before she saw me, but when she did, she began to tell me that I must do something to help her mother. She was only 5 at most, and were thin. Her face was stained with dirt and tears. She she begged me to help. They had to take a ship, she said. Before ah, the plague came, their father was waiting. She began to shake her mother now and cry in the most pathetic and desperate way, and then she looked at me and burst into the greatest flow of tears. Oh, this is sad. You must understand that by now I was burning with physical need to drink. I could not have made it through another day without feeding. But there were alternatives. Rats around abounded in the streets, and somewhere very near a dog was howling hopelessly. I might have pied the room had I chosen and fed and gotten back easily, but the question pounded me. Am I damned? If so, why do I feel such pity for her gaunt face? Why do I wish to touch her tiny soft arms, hold her now on my knee, as I am doing, feel her bend her head to my chest as I gently touch the satin hair? Why do I do this? If I'm damned, I must want to kill her. I must want to make her nothing but food for a cursed existence, because being damned, I must hate her. Then I thought of this. I saw Babette's face contorted with hatred when she had held the lantern waiting to light it, and I saw Lestat in my mind and hated him. And I felt, yes, damned, and this is hell. And in that instant I had bent down, driven hard into her soul, small neck, and hearing her tiny cry, I whispered, even as I felt the hot blood on my lips. It's only for a moment, and there'll be no pain. But she was locked to me, and I was soon incapable of saying anything. For years I had not savored a human. For years I hadn't really known. Now I heard her heart in the terrible rhythm. And such a heart, not the heart of a man or an animal, but the rapid, tenacious heart of the child, beating harder and harder, refusing to die. Beating like a tiny fist beating on a door, crying, I will not die, I will not die, I, I cannot die, I cannot die. I think I rose to my feet, still locked to her, the heart pulling my heart faster with no hope of cease, the rich blood rushing too fast for me, the room reeling, and then, despite myself, I was staring over her bent head, her open mouth, down through the gloom at the mother's face, and through the half-masked lids her eyes gleamed at me as if they were alive. I threw the child down. She lay like a jointless doll, turning in blind horror of the mother to flee. I saw the window filled with a familiar shape. It was Lestat, who backed away from it now, laughing, his body bent as he danced in the mud street. Louis, Louis, he talked to me, pointed a long, bone-thin finger at me, as if to say he'd caught me in the act. And now he bounded over the still, brushing me aside, grabbed the mother's stinking body from the bed, and made to dance with her. Good God, whispered the boy. So if you didn't catch that, Lestat is dancing with a dead woman around the room. Okay. Those of you who don't know, I am reading Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. Yes, I might have said the same, said the vampire. He stumbled over the child as he pulled a mother along the widening circles, singing as he danced. Her matted hair falling in her face as her head snapped back, and a black fluid poured out of her mouth. He threw her down. I was out of the window running down the street, and he was running after me. Are you afraid of me, Louis? He shouted. What? Oh, I have to stop. Oh. Continue. Evidently it will stop. I guess that's the end. Okay. That was interesting. I had to do a verification of it said the live was going to end. I had to do like a puzzle. I'm confused about that. Anyway, I might have oh my god. All right. Let me see, where was I? He stumbled over the child as he pulled the mother along the winding circles, singing as he danced, her mad hair falling in her face as her head snapped back and the black fluid poured out of her mouth. He threw her down. I was out of the window and running down the street, and he was running after me. Are you afraid of me, Louis? He shouted. Are you afraid? The child's alive, Louis. You left her breathing. Shall I go back and make her a vampire? We could use her, Louis, and think of all the pretty dresses we could buy for her, Louis. Wait, Louis. I'll go back for her, if you say. And so he ran after me, all the way back to the hotel, all the way across the rooftops, where I hoped to lose him, until I leaped in the window of the parlor and turned in rage and slammed the window shut. He hit it, arms outstretched, like a bird who seeks to buy through glass, and shook the frame. I was utterly out of my mind. I went round and round the room, looking for some way to kill him. I pictured his body burned to a crisp on the roof below. Okay. Oh my God, why does it? All right, and that is where we will stop for today. Thanks for listening in to Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. Now, I've always wanted to read a vampire book that was reminiscent of The Lost Boys and Fear Street with a splash of romance. So I wrote one. It's called Vampire Juice. And here are some quick reviews I thought I'd share. All right, here we go. My sister bought this book and read it to me at night. I was absolutely in love with the characters and the overall writing. It has the perfect attention to detail and kept me on my toes the whole time. Do yourself a favor and buy this book immediately. All right. Oh, these are off to the side. Where was it? All right. Where's that one? All right. Anyway, here we go. All right. This book sent me back to the days of Goosebumps and Are You Afraid of the Dark? I felt like a kid being sucked into the world of Halloween horrors. It even came complete with a setting reminiscent of the 90s, my favorite era. I always prefer horror that is pre-smartphone age. It follows the experience Sean and She's Not My Girlfriend Amanda as they prepare for the upcoming holiday. The author takes the time to develop the atmosphere and the characters before the focal plot point. The discovery of the vampire juice comes into play. I I appreciate his quick yet thorough setup of both main and supporting characters' personalities as per the age group the story is written for and the genre. It's just right amount of detail. The fast pace of the story is never sacrificed. Bullies coming around to help in the midst of danger or horror is a favorite trope of mine, and the author executed it wonderfully. I also enjoyed the reference to the Lost Boys. There was a clear inspiration drawn from the movie in Vampire Juice, but enough originality not to feel like a copy. The difference in the target age of the audience also keeps it from feeling so. I have to admit that while I was correct in some of the predictions, there was also things I didn't see coming, or rather I thought someone else was responsible. This was a good read to get into the Halloween spirit for sure. It was quirky and fun while maintaining the original foreboding sense we all felt from scary stories and spooky season growing up. Alright, well that's it. My link is in the bio if you're interested in Vampire Juice. If and on Monday we will continue reading Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. Thanks for watching.